In the name of God, in this session, we want to talk about cross-linguistic comparison and its problem. The first question that may be asked of typology is, what is the role of cross-linguistic comparison? The fundamental characteristic of typology in linguistic analysis. Cross-linguistic comparison places the explanation of linguistic phenomena in a single language in a new and different perspective. For example, the distribution of the definite and indefinite articles in English is fairly complex. Here we can see its example. He broke a vase. He broke the vase. The concert will be on Saturday. He went to the bank. I drank wine. The French love glory. He showed extreme care. I love artichoke and asparagus. Birds have wings. His brother became a soldier. Dogs were playing in the yard. The 11 sentences given above characterize 11 types of uses of the article or their absence in English, given as follows. In the A, he broke a vase. We have a specific referential indefinite article. A. The article here are in bold. Number B, he broke the vase. Here is there is specific and definite. The C is a proper name. D, here the bank is a specific manifestation of an institution or place. Wine is partitive of a mass noun. Glory is a generic mass noun. Extreme care is a specific manifestation of an abstract quality, which is mass noun. Extreme care. Okay, here we told you about extreme care, which glory was the generic mass noun. H, artichokes, which is generic of a count noun. Birds have wings. Here wings is generic of an indefinite number of a count noun. A soldier is a predicate nominal. In dogs, here is specific but indefinite number of a count noun. Okay, here we will read and we want to describe this article. It might be possible to develop a set of generalization and analysis that predicts exactly the distribution of the two articles, including their absence in English. Such an account may be syntactic, semantic, or pragmatic, or a combination of all three. Whatever is the case, it will have to be a fairly complex and subtle analysis, especially since the 11 different construction types given here don't exhaust the possibilities. At this point, the typologist will ask, what is the significance of this generalization posited in English for the class of human languages as a whole? I want to repeat this question again. When we, as a typologist, look at such examples in English. As a typologist, we will ask that what is the significance of this generalization posited in English for the class of human languages as a whole. Examining even a relatively closely related language like French produces difficulty for those generalizations. In the exact same context, illustrated here by translation equivalence of English sentences, the distribution of the definite and indefinite articles le, la, le, which le is the masculine article, la is a feminine article, le is for the plural noun, and en and une, and they are definite and they are indefinite, and we use an for the masculine and une for the feminine, respectively. Okay, as I told you, they are indefinite and they are definite, and their absence is quite different. Okay, here we can see exactly the example of English, and here we have their translation in French. For example, I just read some of them. Il a cassé un vase. Un vase is equivalent for a vase. Il a cassé le vase. Le vase is equivalent to de, because in France the noun are considered as feminine or masculine. For example, the vase in France is a masculine one because we use the article le for that, and here for the plural we use le. Okay, it is quite likely that the analysis of the distribution of the English articles would have to be drastically altered, if not abandoned, and a new one developed for the distribution of the French ones. In French, we find a more widespread use of both the French definite and indefinite articles. The appearance of the partitive marker de plus the definite article and the absence of the French indefinite article in the predicate nominal construction. One cannot be certain how much we would have to start all over again. Of course, since to the best of my knowledge, no complete analysis has been worked out. However, a generalization for a subset of 3 of the 11 contexts has been proposed. For the generic count nouns in H and I, generic count nouns H and I. Okay, here artichokes and wings, they are generic count nouns. And the indefinite number of count noun usage in K, which you can refer to them. Carlson in 1977 proposes a unified analysis of the bare plural construction used in both situation types, in which both are of the same semantic type and the differing interpretation are attributed to the semantic type of the predicate. But when we turn to French, we see that in fact 2 different types of construction are found compared to H and to I and K, and so this generalization doesn't clearly apply to the grammatical fact of French. Please refer to this example. One may try to attribute the difference to the French partitive marqueur de, but if we turn to still other languages such as Romanian, which distinguish the two uses solely by the presence versus absence of the article, then we will not be able to invoke such an alternative. Here in this section, it gives us some example of some languages because it wants to show us the cross-linguistic comparison in typology. The fact that analysis of linguistic phenomena, one language at a time, cannot be carried over from one language to the next is somewhat disturbing for the search for language universals. Intricate interaction of internal structural generalization are proposed by linguists to predict grammatical patterns that do not apply even to neighboring languages. This is true not only in structuralist generative analysis, functionalist analysis, which invoke external semantic or pragmatic generalization to account for the distribution of phenomena, like the article of English, often have the same problems. Volumes of so-called functionalism are filled with ingenious appeals to perception, cognition, or other system external functional domains, which are used to explain why the language is in question simply has to have a grammatical particularity that it does, when a moment's further reflection would show that another well-known language, or even just the next dialect down the road, has a grammatical structure diametrically opposed in the relevant parameters. The question here is, to what level of generalization should an analysis of language-specific facts be developed before taking into consideration cross-linguistic patterns? The question here is, to what level of generalization should an analysis of language-specific facts be developed before taking into consideration cross-linguistic patterns? The typologist essentially takes the position that cross-linguistic patterns should be taken into consideration at virtually every level of generalization about human languages. Okay, a typologist essentially takes the position that cross-linguistic patterns should be taken into consideration at virtually every level of generalization about human languages. A cross-linguistic comparative approach, that is, the construction of typological generalization, allows us to make progress on a universal characteristic of the distribution of the articles, for example, and in turn causes us to reassess an analysis formulated without reference to the facts in other languages. This is important. I want to repeat it again. Dear student, I'm forced to read line by line because I want you to know all of them. This is the introduction to typology. A cross-linguistic comparative approach, that is, the construction of typological generalization, allows us to make progress on a universal characteristic of the distribution of articles, for example, and in turn causes us to reassess an analysis formulated without reference to the facts in other languages. There are certain generalizations that cut across the two languages that are very likely to be characteristic of language in general. For instance, the first three uses, which you can see its example in A to C, I think that was a ways, the ways, and I forget the C, are identical in English and French, and it is only in the following 7 that there is substantial variation between the two languages. Okay, the French and English are the same in these 3 examples, but they are different from each other in other examples. With the exception of the K use, all of the variable uses across the two languages concern generic and mass noun contexts of various sorts. Here in this book, it do the cross-linguistic comparison, because we have two languages, English and French, which the writer compared them in terms of article. This suggests that there may be some degree of uniformity across languages in a specific noun phrase context that doesn't exist in generic and mass noun phrase context. There are 2 important points implicit in this proposed generalization over the English and French facts, which summarize the argument for cross-linguistic comparison. The first is that this generalization couldn't be formulated without looking at more than one language. Okay, this generalization couldn't be formulated without looking at more than one language. That is what makes this analysis of grammatical phenomenon typological. The second point pertains to the description and analysis of the grammar of a particular language given the sorts of cross-linguistic generalization that exist. Awareness of cross-linguistic variation allows the linguist describing a particular language to provide a more fine-grained description of the phenomenon in question. For example, being aware of the differences between English and French in generic and mass noun context implies that a grammatical description should explicitly indicate how a language with articles expresses or encodes those different semantic type of noun phrases. A fine-grained description of the linguistic facts of a language is sufficient for descriptive completeness. Of course, one always wants to seek generalization in the data. Moreover, one would like the generalizations to correspond to some empirically real phenomenon, such as the speaker's knowledge of her or his language. If the generalizations are intended to represent the speaker's knowledge of her language, then such an analysis must integrate cross-linguistic comparison according to the typological approach. For example, generalizations about the distribution of the articles in both English and French ought to characterize the distribution in a specific noun phrase context in each language as typical or even universal. And the distribution in generic and mass noun phrase contexts are as arbitrary and language specific, or perhaps subject to other conditions that would be revealed by further cross-linguistic comparison. In this view, the analysis of the articles in French or English would be incomplete, and therefore an inadequate explanation of the phenomenon if its relationship to cross-linguistic generalizations about articles is not taken into account. The generalizations revealed by examining more than one language at a time are the only ones which can be said to hold of languages in general. The speaker's knowledge of her language involves both universal and language particular properties. Okay, all of us, as informed of one language, we know both the universal and language particular properties. Until relatively recently, typology has not directed its attention to the relationship between language universals and the generalization posited in particular language grammars. However, it is not the case that language universals exist independently apart from the linguistic knowledge of language speakers. More recent typological research has begun to address this question and has developed models of representing language particular facts and language universals. Another illustration of the need for a cross-linguistic approach in formulating linguistic generalizations and the difference between a cross-linguistic approach and a one language at a time approach is found in syntactic argumentation. Syntactic argumentation are constructed by means of the distributional method. One examines the occurrence or distribution of a grammatical category in a series of different constructions, and the existence of the category is justified if the distribution pattern is the same across the constructions. For example, in arguing for the category subject in English, the distribution of the immediately preverbal noun phrase is the same in the constructions illustrated in 3-7 and justifies its categorization as a subject. He, dear student, this asterisk marker in syntax means that that sentence is ill-formed. It means that it is not correct. But we have this asterisk in historical studies, which in historical studies it stands for those language which we construct them, the construction form of that language. But here in syntactic in syntax, this is not this show the ill-formed sentence. For example, here it wants to say that he is correct, but him is ill-formed and not correct. He congratulated him. We cannot say that him congratulated him. Nominative case of the pronoun he as opposed to him. Teresa likes not like horses. Agreement of the verb with Teresa. Jack wants to leave. Here they are co-indexical. The person understood to be living is Jack. Jack controls the unexpressed argument of the infinitive following once. Take out the garbage. The unexpressed argument in the imperative construction. In syntax, we call that argument, which arguments show the subject, which other part of the sentence are considered as predicate. John found a ring and took it home with him. Here again we have co-indexical. It cannot be correct. It is ill-formed. John found a ring and was gold. The unexpressed shared argument in a co-joined sentence. That is not true or correct. In terms of standard syntactic argumentation, in example 3-7, Give 5 independent pieces of evidence for identifying the immediately preverbal noun phrase as the subject of the clause. Another way of putting it is that positing the existence of a category subject in English in constructing a translation over the distributional facts presented in 327. A typological analysis, on the other hand, wouldn't present the preceding facts as arguments for a category subject. The facts in 327 are translations formed by examining just one language. For the typologies, the significant questions all refer to the status of this correlation cross-linguistically. Again, we must ask, what elements of this correlation are accidental, a peculiarity of English? What elements of this correlation are universal? What correlations systematically vary across languages, and why? The other side of the coin in invoking cross-linguistic comparison is that by examining a number of diverse languages, one will find striking, fascinating, and sometimes mysterious connections between certain linguistic structures that one would not have imagined if one's attention were restricted to one language or a few typologically similar languages. This may take the form of a peculiar fact of one language which turns out to be widespread, or of a connection between two linguistic phenomena that is widespread but not manifested in one's own language. An example of the former is apparently arbitrary irregularity of the objective forms of the English pronouns me, us, him, her, them versus invariant it. This irregularity is actually a manifestation of an extremely widespread pattern of relationship between case marking and animacy, namely that direct objects that refer to more highly animate beings are more likely to have distinct object case forms. The lack of an objective forms for you is an apparent exception, which is maybe due to a general pattern, namely the typological markedness of plural forms. Another example is the variety of uses of the preposition which is illustrated in the following sentences. I went to New York with John, which is commutative. He opened the door with a crowbar, which is an instrument. He swims with ease, which is manner. We have the preposition with in different sentences with different function. Here is commutative, which comes with John. Here is an instrument with a crowbar, and here is a issue manner. Intuitively, there seems to be little, if any, semantic connection between these three distinct uses of the same preposition. But the typological study of the distribution of a deposition case uses reveal that the subsumption of this and certain other uses under the same positions or case marker is actually quite common. Consider, for example, Hausada and classical Mongolian Ayer and Er in the following example. Okay, here you can see the example of this language, Hausa, which at first we have first person singular, herba means should. This shows the third singular, da mean with, and gun. I shot him with a gun. Okay, here again we have the with in different example of this language. Again, I just read their English equivalent. We ate food with him, which in Hausa they showed that start with. And here with the speed. He ran fast with the speed. And here in classical Mongolian we have ear stop with, food with, treat on, to treat it and with the food. And here again we have ear, which stands for with. Our horse grazes with his horse. And here ear, speed with goes. He goes fast. Investigation of this cross-linguistic phenomenon suggests that the connection between these three uses and certain other uses can be defined in terms of causal relations between participants and properties of an event. An example of two apparently unrelated constructions in English hiding a cross-linguistically evident connection is found with conditional and topics. The antecedent of a conditional sentence is marked with if, while a sentence topic is marked in English with as for or about. If you eat that, you will get sick. As for Randy, he's staying here. Hyman discovered that, in fact, conditional parentheses or antecedent and topics are encoded identically in many languages. For example, in the Papuan language, Hoa, a suffix mo is attached to both potential sentence topics and conditional parentheses. Turkish, sa, the conditional marker, can also mark the constructive topic, and the Tagalog word for if, kank, can mark contrastive topics in conjunction with the preposition tang kol, which is about. This somewhat mysterious connection between conditional parentheses and sentence topics found in several languages, though not in English, led Hyman to discover that the two are actually quite closely related in semantic and pragmatic terms. Finally, cross-linguistic examination may also suggest that a phenomenon found in well-known languages is actually extremely unusual, if not unique, in the world's languages, and thus may be a rather peripheral linguistic phenomenon from a cross-linguistic perspective. For example, the use of the indefinite article in predicate nominals illustrated in 1J example, which you can look at that, is quite uncommon, and the phenomenon of a stranding preposition, as in the book that I told you about, is extremely real among languages of the world. The obligatory presence of unstressed pronoun in subject position in English is also quite uncommon cross-linguistically. This is not to say that such phenomena don't need to be accounted for. It's just that they are perhaps not of as great importance to the study of language universals as the more widespread or universal phenomena, such as the extremely widespread use of the bare noun for predicate nominals and the subsumption of certain case rules under the same position or case affix. Okay, we in these paragraphs read about cross-linguistic comparison. Dear student, when you want to summarize this part, just mention the important matters, and there isn't need to mention the examples. Just the important and core matters should be mentioned. You can summarize them just 1 or 2 pages, not more. But for your final exam, you should know all of the details. But what is the problem of cross-linguistic comparability? The characteristic feature of linguistic typology is cross-linguistic comparison. The fundamental prerequisite for cross-linguistic comparison is cross-linguistic comparability, that is, the ability to identify the same grammatical phenomenon across languages. First, you should know and you should be able to identify the grammatical phenomena across the languages. One cannot make generalizations about subjects across languages without some confidence that one has correctly identified the category of subject in each language and compared subjects across languages. At first, as a typologist, you should know the grammars of the languages. This is, in fact, a fundamental issue in all linguistic theory. Nevertheless, this problem has commanded remarkably little attention relative to its importance for linguistic theorizing. Greenberg's original paper on word order offers the basic answer to the problem of cross-linguistic comparability. It is here assumed, among other things, that all languages have subject-predicate construction. This is common. Differentiated word classes and genitive construction, to mention but a few. I fully realize that in identifying such phenomena in languages of differing structure, one is basically employing semantic criteria. There are very probably formal similarities which permit us to equate such phenomena in different languages. The adequacy of a cross-linguistic definition of noun would, in any case, be tested by reference to its results. From the viewpoint of a semantic phenomena, it was designed to explicate. If, for example, a formal definition of noun resulted in equating a class containing such classes as boy, nose, and house in one language with a class containing such items as eat, drink, and give in a second language, such a definition would for space be rejected and on semantic ground. These remarks summarize the essential problem and a general solution. The essential problem is that languages vary in their structure to a great extent. This is our problem, that languages vary in their structure to a great extent. Indeed, this is what typology and more generally linguistics aims to study and explain. But the variation in structure makes it impossible to use structural criteria or only structural criteria to identify grammatical categories across languages. If we did use structural criteria, we would be prejudging the result of our supposedly empirical analysis. By excluding a priori structural types that do not fit our criteria, hence the ultimate solution is a semantic one. Okay, here this is important and you should mention it in your summarization, that what is the essential problem, what is its solution, which we can use the semantic figures. Greenberg's remarks are echoed by Quenon and Cameri in their analysis of relative clauses in their pioneering work and noun phrase accessibility. We are attempting to determine the universal properties of relative clauses by comparing their syntactic form in a large number of languages. To do this, it is necessary to have a largely syntax-free way of identifying relative clauses in an arbitrary languages. Our solution to this problem is to use an essentially semantically based definition of relative clauses. Okay, they help from the semantic. In the case of relative clauses, the variation of morphosyntactic expression is such that a number of languages use morphological rather than syntactic means for forming what we would intuitively, that is semantically, identify as relative clauses. The term semantic is usually understood as in fact too narrow a description. Various pragmatic features such as discourse structure and conventional conversational context also play a role in determining the cross-linguistic identification of the morphosyntactic phenomena that linguists are concerned with. Semantic is also irrelevant for phonological comparison. For cross-linguistic comparison of sound structure, one must base the analysis on phonetic realization. These parameters are all essentially external, that is, outside the syntactic, morphological, and phonological structure of the language itself. Hence, the solution to the problem of cross-linguistic comparability is to use external definition of grammatical categories. Recognition of the problem of cross-linguistic comparability and its solution has led to the formulation of the standard research strategy for typological research. 1. Determine the particular semantic or pragmatic structure or situation type that one is interested in studying. 2. Examine the morphosyntactic construction or strategies used to encode the situation type. 3. Search for dependencies between the constructions used for that situation and other linguistic factors, other structure features, other external function expressed by the construction in question, or both. I think this solution to the problem of cross-linguistic comparability implies a close relationship between formal and external function. Typological classification, the descriptive prerequisite to typological generalization and explanation, requires a cross-linguistic analysis of the relationship between linguistic form and the function. Since this is a controversial point in contemporary linguistic theory, it is worth examining the problem more closely. I think it is enough for this session. We'll read and continue it in next session. Please look at this video. Sometimes you need to look at it many times to get the points and summarize it, and please don't mention the details in your summarization, but you should know that details for your final exam. But here just mention the important point, and there is a need to mention all of the examples. Just the core point of cross-linguistic comparison and its problem should be mentioned for this session. Please ask your question about this session and the previous session, and WhatsApp. I try to